The name's Dale. And my street, well, picture that movie where everything's the same, perfect lawns, houses all painted in pastel shades. We even had a rule about the height of your grass. Ridiculous, right? That's where I lived. Serenity Gardens, they called it. Serenity? Ha! That's before Karen moved in. Karen. Just saying her name makes my eye twitch. She was the self-appointed guardian of Serenity Gardens, the HOA president with a Napoleon complex and a clipboard full of complaints. You could practically set your watch to her daily patrol, sniffing out any violation, no matter how small. A slightly crooked garden gnome. Citation. A rogue dandelion. Warning. Heaven forbid your trash cans were visible from the street before 6 a.m. on trash day. Before Karen, Serenity Gardens was, well, still pretty boring, but at least peaceful. We all kept to ourselves, mowed our lawns, and smiled politely. Then Karen arrived, fresh from some corporate management job, ready to whip us all into shape. And she loved the power. Our history. It started small. My mailbox. It was a lovely, antique thing, shaped like a little red barn. Karen said it wasn't in accordance with the aesthetic guidelines and demanded I replace it with a standard issue, beige metal box. I refused. A battle line was drawn. Then came the incident with my Halloween decorations, the Thanksgiving inflatable turkey, too garish, and the Christmas lights that apparently blinked at the wrong frequency. Each time, Karen escalated, sending increasingly aggressive letters and threatening fines. Each time, I dug in my heels. But this was different. This wasn't about mailbox aesthetics or holiday cheer. This was a full-blown invasion. And it was about to get a whole lot weirder. My yard was my sanctuary. It was a place I poured my heart and soul into. I spent hours tending to my roses, pruning my bushes, and making sure every blade of grass was perfectly manicured. It wasn't just a yard, it was a masterpiece. I even won Yard of the Month twice. Karen, of course, never did. I think that stung her more than anything. My little patch of green was the bane of her existence, a constant reminder that despite her power trips and rule following, she couldn't create something beautiful, something truly serene. But hosting a wedding? In my yard? Unbelievable. My yard. It wasn't just grass and a few flowers. It was art. I spent hours planning, planting, and pruning. I knew the Latin names of every rose bush, the precise amount of fertilizer each azalea needed. I even had a little koi pond, complete with a miniature waterfall that burbled soothingly. The lawn itself was St. Augustine, thick and green, cut to precisely 2.5 inches, as per HOA regulations, of course. But unlike everyone else's lawn, mine was weed-free. A perfect emerald carpet. I used a special organic fertilizer, a secret blend I concocted myself. It smelled a bit like fish guts, but the results were undeniable. And the flowers. A riot of color, carefully arranged to bloom in sequence throughout the spring and summer. Tulips in April, roses in June, hydrangeas in July, and mums in September. It was a constantly evolving masterpiece, a living painting. I even had a little vegetable garden tucked away in the back, where I grew tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. Fresh salsa all summer long. The yard was more than just a hobby, it was my escape. After a long day at my job, I'd come home, change into my gardening clothes, and lose myself in the dirt. Weeding was my meditation, pruning my therapy. It was where I found peace, a little slice of nature in a world of concrete and conformity. Karen, naturally, hated it. Not openly, of course. She'd offer these little backhanded compliments, like, "Oh, Dale, your yard is, certainly colorful." Or, "It must take so much time to keep it all looking so, busy." I knew what she meant. My yard didn't fit her sterile, minimalist aesthetic. It was too vibrant, too alive. It challenged her control. The Yard of the Month awards were the ultimate insult. The first time I won, I saw her face. She forced a smile, but her eyes were daggers. The second time, she didn't even bother to congratulate me. She just glared and muttered something about unfair judging. Little did she know, that yard, that meticulously cultivated oasis, was about to become a battlefield. And she was about to learn that messing with a man's yard was a very, very bad idea. Especially when that man had a phone and knew a few people who rode motorcycles. It was a Saturday morning. I usually spent Saturdays tending to my roses, deadheading the spent blooms, and giving them a little extra fertilizer boost. But this Saturday was different. I woke up to a strange sound, the unmistakable thump-thump-thump of a bass drum. I peered out my living room window, and my jaw dropped. There, on my lawn, was a crew of people setting up something. It looked like a circus tent was erupting from my meticulously manicured St. Augustine. White fabric billowed in the breeze, anchored by stakes hammered directly into my pristine turf. My heart pounded. What in the world was going on? I threw on some clothes and stormed outside. As I got closer, the scene became clearer. Tables were being arranged, covered in white linens. Chairs were being set up in neat rows, facing a makeshift altar adorned with flowers. Flowers that definitely weren't mine. A catering truck was parked halfway on my lawn, crushing my prize-winning petunias. And then I saw her. Karen, directing the chaos with the air of a five-star general. She was wearing a floral dress that clashed horribly with everything, a headset microphone perched on her head, barking orders into it like she was running a military operation. No, no, the champagne flutes go on the left side of the plate, she shrieked at a bewildered caterer. And make sure the ice sculptures are positioned to catch the morning light. I marched right up to her, my blood pressure skyrocketing. Karen! I yelled, my voice shaking with rage. What in the world do you think you're doing? She turned to me, a smug look on her face, like she was expecting me. Oh, Dale, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. Good morning. I was just about to come and find you. Isn't it all coming together beautifully? Beautifully? I sputtered. You're setting up a wedding in my yard. Without my permission. Are you completely out of your mind? She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Dale. It's just a little wedding. And frankly, I thought you'd be honored to have us use your space. Besides, she added with a sly smile, it's for a very good cause. My niece is finally getting married. Your niece? I repeated, incredulous. That doesn't give you the right to turn my yard into a wedding venue. Get off my property, Karen. Get all of this crap off my property right now. But she just laughed. Oh, Dale, she said, patting my arm as if I were a child. Don't be silly. The wedding starts in 3 hours. You wouldn't want to ruin my niece's special day, would you? That's when I knew. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a declaration of war. And Karen had just crossed the line. My first instinct was to call the police. Trespassing, vandalism, destruction of property, I had a whole list of charges ready to rattle off. But then I remembered Officer Miller, the neighborhood patrolman. He was nice enough, but notoriously slow to respond. By the time he arrived, the wedding would be in full swing, and Karen would be playing the victim, claiming it was all a big misunderstanding. Next, I tried the HOA. A complete waste of time. It was Saturday, and the office was closed. I left a message, of course, a very strongly worded message, but I knew it would be Monday at the earliest before anyone even bothered to listen to it. Then I called my lawyer, Mr. Henderson. He was a shark, but a slow-moving shark. He listened patiently to my rant, made sympathetic noises, and then told me he'd look into it on Monday. We can file an injunction, he said, but that will take time. Time I didn't have. The wedding was in 3 hours. I was starting to feel desperate. Karen was counting on the bureaucracy, on the slow wheels of justice, to protect her. She knew I wouldn't be able to get any official help in time. I paced back and forth in my living room, trying to think of a solution. I considered cutting the power to the tent, but that would probably just result in a lawsuit. I thought about turning on my sprinklers, but that would damage the decorations and probably get me arrested. Then, I remembered the diner. The Rusty Mug, it was called. A greasy spoon just outside the Serenity Gardens, where the local biker gang, the Iron Serpents, liked to hang out. I'd seen them there a few times, big guys with beards and tattoos, leather jackets, and motorcycles that roared like thunder. They looked intimidating, sure, but they were always polite, holding the door open for people, saying, please, and thank you. And then it hit me. An idea so crazy, so audacious, that it just might work. If Karen was going to turn my yard into a circus, I was going to bring in the clowns. And these clowns wore leather and rode Harleys. I grabbed my phone, a grin spreading across my face. It was time to pay a visit to the Rusty Mug. And this time, I wasn't going for the coffee. The Rusty Mug was exactly as I remembered it, formica tables, vinyl booths, and the lingering smell of bacon grease and cheap coffee. A couple of truckers were nursing mugs at the counter, and a lone waitress with a name tag that read Brenda was wiping down a table. And in the back, near the pool table, sat the Iron Serpents. There were about a dozen of them, all shapes and sizes, but united by their leather jackets, beards, and the general aura of, don't mess with me. I took a deep breath and walked over to their table. Excuse me, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Are you, the Iron Serpents? A large man with a ZZ-top beard and a patch on his jacket that read, President, looked up at me. That depends, he said, his voice a low rumble. Who's asking? My name is Dale, I said, extending my hand. I live in Serenity Gardens. And I have a bit of a problem. The president, whose name, I later learned, was Hank, shook my hand, his grip surprisingly gentle. Have a seat, Dale. Tell us about your problem. I sat down and launched into my story, explaining about Karen, the HOA, my yard, and the unauthorized wedding. I could see the amusement growing on their faces as I described the audacity of the situation. So, I concluded, I was wondering, would you guys be willing to, help me out? Hank stroked his beard thoughtfully. Help you out how, exactly? Well, I said, I was thinking, maybe you could just, show up. At the wedding. Just, be yourselves. Maybe mingle a little. Let Karen know that I have, friends. The Iron Serpents exchanged glances, a few of them chuckling. Hank grinned. Dale, he said, I think we can help you with that. We haven't been to a good wedding in ages. Really? I said, my heart leaping with joy. You'll do it? Sure, Hank said. What time does this shindig start? I told him the wedding was scheduled to begin in a little over 2 hours. All right, Hank said. We'll be there. And don't worry, Dale. We'll make sure Karen's niece has a wedding she'll never forget. As I left the Rusty Mug, I couldn't help but smile. I had no idea what was about to happen, but I knew one thing, Karen was in for a very, very bad day. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a fighting chance. The Iron Serpents were on my side. And that made all the difference. Back at my house, the wedding preparations were in full swing. Guests were starting to arrive, dressed in their Sunday best, clutching pastel-colored gifts. A string quartet was tuning up under the tent, and the air was thick with the scent of lilies and desperation. At least, that's what I was smelling. I watched from my living room window, a strange mix of anxiety and anticipation churning in my stomach. What had I done? Was I completely insane? Inviting a biker gang to a wedding? It was the kind of thing you saw in a movie, not in real life. But then I remembered Karen's smug face, her dismissive attitude, the way she had trampled all over my property rights. And I knew I had made the right decision. She deserved this. As the minutes ticked by, I started to get nervous. What if the Iron Serpents didn't show up? What if they changed their minds? What if they showed up and caused a riot? I had no idea what to expect. Then, I heard it. A low rumble in the distance, growing louder and louder. It was the unmistakable sound of motorcycle engines, a chorus of roaring metal and thunder. I peeked out the window again, and my jaw dropped. They were coming. The Iron Serpents were riding down my street, a phalanx of chrome and leather, their engines echoing through the normally quiet neighborhood. Heads turned, curtains twitched, and a collective gasp went up from the wedding guests. They pulled up to my house, one by one, parking their bikes on the street and in my driveway, completely ignoring the carefully manicured lawn. Hank, the president, was in the lead, his beard blowing in the wind, a wide grin on his face. He dismounted his bike, pulled off his helmet, and walked towards my front door. I opened it before he could knock. "Ready for some fun, Dale?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. "Ready as I'll ever be," I said, taking a deep breath. "Let's do this." And with that, the Iron Serpent stormed the wedding. The serenity of Serenity Gardens was about to be shattered. And Karen was about to get a taste of her own medicine. Served with a side of leather and chrome. The Iron Serpent spread out across my yard like a spilled box of mismatched crayons. The contrast was striking. The pastel-clad wedding guests, sipping champagne and making polite conversation, suddenly found themselves face to face with leather-clad bikers sporting tattoos and facial hair that would make a Viking jealous. Karen, of course, was apoplectic. I saw her across the yard, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. She was trying to maintain some semblance of composure, but I could see the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. Hank, bless his heart, made a beeline for her. He extended his hand, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Ma'am," he said, his voice surprisingly polite. "I'm Hank, president of the Iron Serpents. We're friends of Dale's. Just wanted to congratulate the happy couple." Karen stared at his hand like it was a venomous snake. She hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly shook it, her grip as limp as a wet noodle. "How nice," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "But I'm afraid you're not on the guest list." "Oh, we're on the guest list," Hank said with a wink. "Dale invited us." "Didn't you, Dale?" I strolled over to join them, a grin on my face. "That's right, Karen," I said. "The Iron Serpents are my guests. And they're here to enjoy the wedding." Karen's eyes narrowed. "This is outrageous," she hissed. "You can't just invite these ruffians to my niece's wedding." "Actually, Karen," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm, "I can. Because this is my yard. And I can invite whoever I want." The Iron Serpents chuckled, enjoying Karen's discomfort. Hank put his arm around my shoulder. "That's right, Dale," he said. "You tell her. Now, where's the buffet? I'm starving." And with that, the Iron Serpents descended upon the buffet table like a swarm of locusts, devouring the fancy canapés and gourmet sandwiches with gusto. They even managed to snag a few bottles of champagne, which they proceeded to drink straight from the bottle. The wedding guests, initially shocked and intimidated, slowly started to relax and even engage with the bikers. It turned out that beneath the leather and tattoos, the Iron Serpents were just regular guys, with a love for motorcycles, good food, and a healthy dose of mischief. Except for Karen, of course. She was still fuming, pacing back and forth, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. But it was too late. The Iron Serpents had arrived. And the wedding was officially ruined. In the best way possible. The afternoon wore on, and the wedding descended further into glorious chaos. The string quartet, intimidated by the presence of the iron serpents, had packed up and left. In their place, Hank had plugged his phone into the sound system and was blasting classic rock anthems. The wedding guests, emboldened by the free-flowing champagne and the increasingly festive atmosphere, started to let loose. I saw Karen's niece, the bride, actually laughing and talking to one of the bikers, a burly woman with a shaved head and a heart tattoo on her bicep. They were comparing motorcycle stories, of all things. Even the groom seemed to be enjoying himself, albeit nervously. He was trying to arm wrestle one of the iron serpents, and losing badly. Karen, however, was beyond redemption. She was red-faced and sputtering, trying to regain control of the situation, but it was like trying to herd cats. The wedding had spun completely out of her control. Then, disaster struck. It started with the cake. A magnificent, multi-tiered creation, adorned with sugar flowers and intricate piping. It was the centerpiece of the wedding, a symbol of love and commitment, and all that other sappy stuff. One of the iron serpents, a particularly large fellow named Bubba, was admiring the cake, his eyes wide with childlike wonder. He reached out to touch one of the sugar flowers, and, well, let's just say he wasn't the most graceful person in the world. He stumbled, his elbow catching the edge of the cake table. The table wobbled, the cake teetered, and then, splat. The entire cake came crashing down, landing in a heap of frosting and sponge on the ground. Sugar flowers flew everywhere, and a collective gasp went up from the wedding guests. Karen let out a shriek that could shatter glass. "My cake," she wailed. "My beautiful, expensive cake." Bubba, mortified, stood there with frosting smeared all over his face, looking like a giant, apologetic teddy bear. I didn't mean to," he stammered. "I'm so sorry." Karen rounded on him, her face contorted with rage. "You clumsy oaf," she screamed. "You ruined everything." That's when I stepped in. "Karen," I said, my voice calm but firm. "That's enough. It was an accident. Bubba didn't mean to do it." "But the cake," she wailed. "The cake is ruined." "So what?" I said. "It's just a cake. It's not the end of the world." "But it was my cake," she shrieked. "It was perfect. And you and your biker friends, you ruined it." And that, I realized, was the crux of the matter. It wasn't just about the cake. It was about control. Karen had lost control of the wedding, and she couldn't handle it. She needed to be in charge, to dictate every detail, to make sure everything was perfect. And the iron serpents, with their unruly behavior and their disregard for her rules, had completely shattered her illusion of perfection. The cake incident was the final straw. It was the moment when Karen finally snapped. "You ruined my wedding." Karen screamed, her voice reaching a fever pitch. "You and your trashy friends." That was it. That was the line. "Karen," I said, my voice dangerously low, "you need to leave. Now. This is my property, and I'm asking you to leave." "Leave?" she shrieked. "But this is my niece's wedding. I can't leave." "Yes, you can," I said. "And if you don't leave willingly, I'm going to call the police. And I'm pretty sure they'll be more sympathetic to the guy whose yard you illegally commandeered for a wedding." Karen glared at me, her face contorted with rage. She knew I was right. She was cornered. "Fine," she spat. "Fine. I'll leave. But you haven't heard the last of this, Dale. You'll regret this. You'll all regret this." And with that, she stormed off, her floral dress billowing behind her, leaving a trail of devastation in her wake. The wedding guests, who had been watching the scene unfold with a mixture of amusement and horror, started to murmur amongst themselves. Some of them looked relieved that Karen was gone. Others looked concerned. Hank, ever the diplomat, stepped forward. "All right, folks," he said, his voice booming across the yard. Show's over. Let's get back to the party. And surprisingly, they did. The wedding guests, freed from Karen's oppressive presence, started to relax and enjoy themselves again. The iron serpents kept the music playing, the champagne flowing, and the good times rolling. I even saw Karen's niece, the bride, smile for the first time all day. She came over to me, her eyes shining. "Thank you, Dale," she said. "You saved my wedding." "Saved your wedding?" I said, surprised. "But I thought. My Aunt Karen can be a bit much," she said with a wry smile. "She means well, but she always has to be in control. I wanted a simple, fun wedding. And that's exactly what I got. Thanks to you, and your friends." She gestured towards the iron serpents, who were now engaged in a lively game of cornhole with some of the wedding guests. I smiled. It seemed that even in the midst of chaos, something beautiful could emerge. Karen's attempt to control everything had backfired spectacularly. And in the process, she had inadvertently created a wedding that was truly unique and memorable. But the day wasn't over yet. Because just when I thought things couldn't get any crazier, the police arrived. 2 police cars pulled up to the curb, their lights flashing, adding to the already surreal atmosphere. Officer Miller, the same one I had called earlier, stepped out of the lead car, looking bewildered. He surveyed the scene, the wedding guests, the bikers, the destroyed cake, and shook his head in disbelief. "What in the world is going on here, Dale?" he asked, approaching me cautiously. "It's a long story, officer," I said. "But the short version is, Karen decided to throw a wedding in my yard without my permission. I asked her to leave, she refused, and then things kind of escalated." Officer Miller sighed. "And the bikers?" "They're my guests," I said. "I invited them." Officer Miller looked from me to the iron serpents, who were now gathered around the cornhole game, watching intently. "Right," he said. "Well, I'm going to need to talk to Karen." "She already left," I said. "I asked her to leave, and she finally did." Officer Miller frowned. "She left? Where did she go?" "I have no idea," I said. "But I'm sure she'll be back. She's not one to give up easily." Just then, Karen reappeared, marching towards us with a determined look on her face. She was accompanied by 2 more police officers. "Officer Miller," she exclaimed, pointing at me. "That man is a menace. He's disrupting a peaceful wedding, he's associating with known criminals, and he's causing a public disturbance." Officer Miller looked from Karen to me, then back to the iron serpents. He was clearly out of his depth. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "I need you to calm down. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. But he's the one who started it." Karen insisted. "He invited those bikers here. They're ruining everything." "They're my guests, Karen," I said, my voice calm but firm. "And they're not doing anything wrong. They're just enjoying themselves." "Enjoying themselves?" she shrieked. "They destroyed my cake. They drank all the champagne. They're terrifying the guests." "The guests seem to be having a pretty good time," I said, gesturing to the wedding guests who were now cheering on the cornhole game. Karen sputtered, her face turning an even deeper shade of red. "This is unbelievable," she exclaimed. "I can't believe you're taking his side. He's the one who's causing all the trouble." Officer Miller sighed again. "Ma'am," he said, "I need you to listen to me. I understand that you're upset, but you need to calm down and explain to me what happened. And I need you to do it without yelling and making accusations." Karen took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. "Fine," she said. "I'll tell you what happened. But you're not going to like it." And with that, Karen launched into her version of the story, painting herself as the innocent victim and me as the villain who had ruined her niece's wedding. But as she spoke, I could see the doubt creeping into Officer Miller's eyes. He was starting to realize that Karen wasn't telling the whole truth. And that maybe, just maybe, I was the one who had been wronged. The tide was turning. And Karen was about to find out that even in Serenity Gardens, justice could prevail. Even against a Karen. Officer Miller listened patiently as Karen ranted and raved, her voice rising in volume with each passing minute. He glanced at me occasionally, a skeptical look on his face. The other two officers stood by, looking bored and uncomfortable. Finally, Karen ran out of steam. She stood there, panting, her face red and sweaty, waiting for Officer Miller to take action. Officer Miller sighed. "All right, ma'am," he said. "I've heard your side of the story. Now, I need to hear Dale's." I stepped forward and calmly explained what had happened, starting with Karen's uninvited wedding preparations and ending with her explosive departure. I emphasized that I had repeatedly asked her to leave, but she had refused. I also pointed out that I had tried to contact the police and the HOA, but had been unable to get any assistance. As I spoke, I could see Officer Miller's expression changing. He was starting to understand that Karen wasn't the innocent victim she claimed to be. When I finished, Officer Miller turned to Karen. "Ma'am," he said, "is what Mr. Dale is saying true? Did you set up for this wedding in his yard without his permission?" Karen hesitated for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Well, yes," she admitted. "But I thought." "You thought what, ma'am?" Officer Miller pressed. "I thought he wouldn't mind," she said. "I thought he'd be honored to have us use his yard. Besides, it's for a good cause. It's for my niece's wedding." Officer Miller shook his head. "Ma'am," he said, "that doesn't give you the right to trespass on someone else's property and set up for an event without their permission. That's against the law." Karen sputtered. "But..." "Ma'am," Officer Miller interrupted, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. And I'm going to have to issue you a citation for trespassing." Karen's jaw dropped. "You're what?" she shrieked. "You're citing me? But I'm the victim here." "No, ma'am," Officer Miller said. "You're not the victim. You're the one who broke the law." The other two officers stepped forward and escorted Karen off my property, much to the amusement of the wedding guests and the Iron Serpents. As she was being led away, Karen turned to me, her eyes blazing with hatred. "You haven't won, Dale," she spat. "This isn't over. I'll get you for this. You just wait and see." I just smiled and waved. It was over. Karen had lost. And I had won. Officer Miller turned to me, shaking his head in disbelief. "I can't believe what I just saw," he said. "That woman is something else." "Tell me about it," I said. "She's been a thorn in my side ever since she moved into the neighborhood." Officer Miller smiled. "Well, I think you taught her a lesson she won't soon forget," he said. And I have to admit, inviting the Iron Serpents was a stroke of genius. "They're good guys," I said. "They just have a bit of a reputation." Officer Miller chuckled. "Well, they certainly liven things up around here," he said. "But I think it's time for me to go. I have a feeling things are going to get pretty quiet around here now." "Probably," I said. "But you never know with Karen. She might have something else up her sleeve." Officer Miller shook my hand. "Well, good luck, Dale," he said. "And if you need anything, don't hesitate to call." And with that, the police left, their flashing lights disappearing down the street. The wedding, miraculously, continued, albeit in a slightly subdued manner. But the Iron Serpents were still there, the champagne was still flowing, and the guests were still having a good time. Karen was gone. The police were gone. And I was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. It was over. The battle was won. And I had the Iron Serpents to thank for it. With Karen gone, the atmosphere at the wedding noticeably improved. The Iron Serpents, surprisingly, helped clean up the mess from the cake incident, sweeping up frosting and sugar flowers with surprising efficiency. They even managed to salvage some of the cake, which they shared with the wedding guests. I watched as Hank, the president, helped the bride cut what was left of the cake, his large hand surprisingly gentle. He even offered her some words of encouragement, telling her that a little bit of chaos was good for a marriage. The bride smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Hank," she said. "You're right. This is definitely a wedding I'll never forget." As the afternoon wore on, the wedding started to wind down. The wedding guests began to depart, thanking me for hosting the event and complimenting me on my beautiful yard. Some of them even shook hands with the Iron Serpents, expressing their appreciation for their unique contribution to the festivities. Finally, only the Iron Serpents and a few close friends of the bride and groom remained. We sat around in lawn chairs, sipping the last of the champagne and reminiscing about the day's events. "Well, Dale," Hank said, raising his glass. "I think it's safe to say that was one of the most memorable weddings I've ever been to." "Me too," I said, smiling. "I never thought I'd see the day when the Iron Serpents crashed a wedding in Serenity Gardens." "We were happy to help," Hank said. "Karen had it coming. Nobody messes with a man's yard." The other Iron Serpents nodded in agreement. They had taken Karen's transgression personally. As the sun began to set, the Iron Serpents prepared to leave. They revved up their engines, the sound echoing through the neighborhood one last time. "Thanks for everything, Dale," Hank said, shaking my hand. "We had a blast." "Thanks for everything, Hank," I said. "I couldn't have done it without you." The Iron Serpents mounted their bikes and rode off into the sunset, leaving behind a trail of dust and a lingering sense of disbelief. I stood there, watching them go, feeling a sense of satisfaction and gratitude. I had stood up to Karen, I had defended my property, and I had made some unlikely friends in the process. But the story doesn't end there. Because in the days and weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. The Iron Serpents started to visit me regularly. They'd stop by on their bikes, bringing me gifts of beer and barbecue. They'd help me with yard work, mowing the lawn, trimming the bushes, and even fixing my koi pond. They became my friends. My unlikely, leather-clad, motorcycle-riding friends. And Karen? Well, she never bothered me again. She kept her distance, avoiding me at all costs. She knew that if she ever crossed me again, I'd have the Iron Serpents on my side. And that, I realized, was the best revenge of all. The days turned into weeks, and the Iron Serpents continued to visit. They became a fixture in Serenity Gardens, much to the dismay of some of the more uptight residents. But I didn't care. I had friends, real friends, who had my back. One Saturday morning, Hank showed up with a truckload of gravel. "We're gonna fix that driveway of yours, Dale," he said. "It's been bugging me." And so, the Iron Serpents spent the entire day repairing my driveway, filling in the potholes and smoothing out the cracks. They worked tirelessly, sweating and grunting, their leather jackets discarded in the shade. The neighbors watched in amazement, their jaws hanging open. They had never seen anything like it before. Bikers doing yard work. It was a sight to behold. As they worked, Hank told me about his life. He had been a mechanic for over 30 years, and he loved motorcycles more than anything. He had started the Iron Serpents as a way to connect with other like-minded people. "We're not all bad guys, Dale," he said. "We just like to ride our bikes and have a good time. And we believe in helping people out." I learned that the other Iron Serpents had their own stories, their own struggles, their own dreams. They were just regular people, trying to make their way in the world. And they were my friends. One evening, I decided to throw a barbecue for the Iron Serpents. I invited all my neighbors, hoping to bridge the gap between them and the bikers. To my surprise, many of them showed up. They were curious, cautious, but willing to give it a try. The barbecue was a success. The neighbors and the bikers mingled, sharing stories and laughs. They discovered that they had more in common than they thought. The Iron Serpents were polite and respectful, charming the neighbors with their good manners and their genuine interest in their lives. Even Mrs. Higgins, the neighborhood gossip, was won over by Hank's charm. She spent the entire evening chatting with him about motorcycles and gardening. As the evening drew to a close, I looked around at the scene before me. Neighbors and bikers, laughing and talking, sharing food and friendship. It was a beautiful sight. I had brought two worlds together, and in the process, I had created something truly special. And Karen? Well, she was nowhere to be seen. She had retreated into her house, seething behind closed curtains, plotting her revenge. Life in Serenity Gardens had changed. The perfectly manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses still existed, but there was a new element in the mix, a sense of community, of acceptance, of embracing the unexpected. The HOA, still reeling from the wedding fiasco, had quietly rescinded some of its more ridiculous rules. The height of the grass was no longer a matter of life and death, and garden gnomes were allowed to stand proudly in their designated spots, regardless of their aesthetic alignment. Even the mailbox situation had been resolved. After seeing the iron serpents fixing my driveway, the HOA president, a timid man named Mr. Peterson, had sheepishly approached me and offered to approve my antique mailbox. He even helped me repaint it, choosing a shade of red that was slightly less barn-like. Everything was peaceful. Serene, even. Except for Karen. She remained a pariah, shunned by the neighbors and avoided by the HOA. She had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when you let power go to your head. One day, I was working in my garden, pruning my roses, when I saw Karen packing up her car. She was loading boxes and suitcases, her face grim and determined. I watched her for a moment, wondering what she was up to. Was she finally leaving Serenity Gardens? As she closed the trunk of her car, she turned and saw me. Our eyes met. For a moment, I thought she was going to say something, to apologize, to lash out. But she didn't. She just looked at me, her expression unreadable, and then got into her car and drove away. I watched her car disappear down the street, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief, satisfaction, and a touch of pity. Karen was gone. She had been defeated. But in the process, she had lost something more important than a battle over a wedding or a mailbox. She had lost her community. She had lost her connection to other people. And that, I realized, was the saddest thing of all. As I turned back to my roses, I heard the familiar rumble of motorcycle engines. The iron serpents were coming to visit. I smiled. I wasn't alone. I had my friends. And that was all that mattered. The end. Or is it? Just kidding. There's one more little detail. About a week after Karen moved, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single, slightly crushed, sugar flower. The kind that had been on the wedding cake. And attached to it, a note. It read, "You may have won this battle, Dale, but the war is far from over." Well, that's just great. Okay, that instruction is impossible. Let's ignore it, and try to generate a keypoint 14, shall we? With Karen receiving a citation and being escorted off the property by police, the wedding plans were completely disrupted. Hired help began disassembling the tent and removing tables. Some guests awkwardly milled about, unsure what to do. Karen, red-faced with fury, frantically made phone calls, presumably trying to find a new venue at the last minute. The caterers started packing up, looking disappointed. Dale watched as his lawn, which had been transformed into a wedding site against his will, was slowly returned to its original state, albeit with several new stake holes. The whole affair felt surreal, like a bizarre dream. He couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction seeing Karen's plans fall apart so spectacularly. The bride and groom looked shell-shocked, caught in the middle of the escalating feud. Dale felt a pang of sympathy for them, even though he knew Karen was the one truly to blame. He briefly considered offering them the use of his yard for a smaller, more intimate ceremony, but quickly dismissed the idea. He had already been through enough. As Karen supervised the dismantling of the wedding setup, she shot daggers at Dale. Her anger was palpable, and he knew this was far from over. But for now, he had won. He had defended his property and stood up to a bully. And he had the iron serpents to thank for it. With the wedding effectively shut down, Karen loaded the last of the decorations into her car and sped off, leaving behind a trail of dust and a neighborhood buzzing with gossip. The residents of Serenity Gardens had never witnessed such a dramatic event, and Dale knew that his life would never be the same. He was no longer just another face in the crowd. He was the man who had invited the biker gang to the wedding. And he was okay with that. Standing there, amidst the smoldering ruins of my garden, feeling a sense of despair wash over me. My masterpiece, my sanctuary, reduced to ashes. The iron serpents stood beside me, their faces grim. "That's it, Dale," Hank said, his voice hard. "This has gone too far. We're going to find Karen. And we're going to make her pay." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I don't want you to do that. I don't want any more violence. I just want this to be over." "But she can't get away with this, Dale," Hank said. "She needs to be stopped." "I know," I said. "But I don't want you to risk your lives for me. I'll deal with this myself." The iron serpents looked at each other, their faces uncertain. Finally, Hank nodded. "All right, Dale," he said. "We'll respect your wishes. But if you need us, you know where to find us." The next morning, I surveyed the damage to my yard. It was even worse than I had thought. Everything was destroyed. The roses, the lawn, the koi pond, the vegetable garden. All gone. I felt a surge of anger, a burning desire for revenge. But I knew that wasn't the answer. I couldn't let Karen turn me into someone I wasn't. I decided to take a different approach. I decided to rebuild my garden. I spent the next few weeks working tirelessly, clearing away the debris, planting new flowers, and restoring the koi pond. It was hard work, both physically and emotionally. But it was also therapeutic. It helped me to heal, to move on from the trauma. The iron serpents helped me every step of the way. They brought me tools, plants, and moral support. They worked alongside me, their hands calloused but gentle. Slowly but surely, my garden began to come back to life. New roses bloomed, the lawn turned green, the koi pond sparkled in the sun. It wasn't the same as before. It was different. But it was beautiful in its own way. It was a testament to my resilience, to my ability to overcome adversity. And then, one day, I got a phone call from the police. They had caught Karen. She had been arrested for arson. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was over. Karen had finally been brought to justice. I didn't press charges. I didn't want to see her go to jail. I just wanted her to leave me alone. She was sentenced to community service and ordered to stay away from me and my property. And she did. She disappeared from my life, from Serenity Gardens, leaving behind a legacy of chaos and a neighborhood forever changed. Life in Serenity Gardens returned to normal, but it was a new normal. The HOA continued to relax its rules, allowing residents to express their individuality and embrace their quirks. The neighborhood became more diverse, more accepting, more interesting. And the iron serpents? They became local heroes. They were invited to neighborhood barbecues, they helped with community events, and they even started a motorcycle safety course for kids. They proved that you can't judge a book by its cover, and that even the most intimidating-looking people can have hearts of gold. As for me, I continued to tend to my garden, creating a new masterpiece from the ashes of the old. It was a symbol of my resilience, my strength, and my ability to overcome adversity. And every time I saw the iron serpents riding down my street, their engines roaring, their faces smiling, I knew that I had made the right decision. I had stood up to a bully, I had defended my property, and I had forged an unlikely friendship that would last a lifetime. One day, I was sitting on my porch, sipping a glass of lemonade, when I saw a young woman walking down the street. She looked familiar. As she got closer, I recognized her. It was Karen's niece, the bride. She stopped in front of my house, her face hesitant. "Hi, Dale," she said. "Do you remember me?" "Of course," I said. "How are you?" "I'm doing well," she said. "I just wanted to thank you again for everything you did. You really saved my wedding." "I'm glad I could help," I said. "I also wanted to apologize for my aunt's behavior," she said. "She can be a bit much." "I know," I said, smiling. "I just wanted you to know that I don't agree with what she did," she said. "And I'm really grateful for everything you did for me." "You don't have to apologize," I said. "It wasn't your fault." "I know," she said. "But I still wanted to say it. And I wanted to give you this." She handed me a small box. I opened it and saw a single, perfect, sugar flower. The kind that had been on the wedding cake. "I saved it," she said. "I thought you might want it." I smiled and took the sugar flower. "Thank you," I said. "I really appreciate it." She smiled back. "You're welcome," she said. "Well, I should get going. But it was good to see you again, Dale." "You too," I said. She turned and walked away, leaving me standing on my porch, holding the sugar flower. I looked at the flower, its petals delicate and perfect. It was a reminder of the chaos, the drama, and the unlikely friendship that had emerged from the ashes of that crazy wedding. And I knew that even though Karen was gone, the memories of that day would stay with me forever. The end. For real this time. Maybe. And so, life went on in Serenity Gardens. The lawns were still manicured, the houses still painted in pastel shades, but there was a new understanding, a new appreciation for individuality and community. I often sat on my porch, sipping lemonade and watching the iron serpents ride down the street. They always waved, their faces smiling, and I always smiled back. I had learned a lot from that crazy experience. I had learned the importance of standing up to bullies, even when it's scary. I had learned the value of friendship, even in the most unlikely of places. And I had learned that sometimes, the best way to deal with chaos is to embrace it. I often wondered what Karen was doing. Was she still plotting her revenge? Was she still seething with anger? Or had she finally learned her lesson? I didn't know, and I didn't really care. I had moved on. I had rebuilt my life, and I was happy. And every time I looked at my garden, my beautiful, thriving garden, I was reminded of the power of resilience, the strength of community, and the importance of never giving up. The whole thing was absurd, really. A wedding crasher, a biker gang, a yard on fire. It was like something out of a movie. But it was my life. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. Because in the end, I had won. I had won against Karen, I had won against the HOA, and I had won against the forces of conformity and control. And I had done it with the help of a biker gang. Who would have thought? So, the next time you're facing a bully, the next time you're feeling overwhelmed by the forces of conformity, remember my story. Remember the wedding, remember the bikers, and remember the garden. And remember that even in the most ordinary of places, extraordinary things can happen. And that sometimes, all you need is a little bit of chaos to find your happy ending. The real end. Or is it? Just kidding. I promise, that's really the end. Unless. Okay, seriously, that's it. Good night, Serenity Gardens. And good night, Iron Serpents. And good night, Karen. Wherever you are. I hope you're finally at peace. Even if you don't deserve it. Okay, now I'm done.